From BBC Radio 4, this is Things Fell Apart, Strange Tales from the Culture Wars. I'm Jon Ronson, a writer living in America, the land where culture wars begin. And by culture wars, I mean almost everything that people yell at each other about on social media.
We want to take masks off our children. That should be our choice.
You are a white privileged male who has no experience.
I can't help what I am. I was born like this.
I'm not saying that people should not be allowed to go through that procedure. What I'm saying is it doesn't make them a woman. It happens to be an opinion.
These wars can obsess us. They can consume our lives and tear families apart. I was curious to learn how things fell apart, and so I went back in history to find the origin stories, the pebbles thrown in the pond, creating the ripples. I had no idea what I would find, but I've uncovered some strange and unexpected tales of real consequence. This story is about the very surprising reason why one of America's first and most violent culture wars began, one that rages to this day.
There was this ping and like a sound of little shattered glass, and there was a bullet flying around the house. Before the dinger went off on the microwave, Bart was dead.
It'll end with a bullet ricocheting around a kitchen in Buffalo, New York. But it starts with an American boy growing up among Christian intellectuals in a Swiss mountain retreat in the 1960s and 70s, daydreaming about one day directing Hollywood films.
I'm a dyslexic little kid roaming around in the Alps, growing up in a weird fundamentalist American evangelical commune.
The boy's name was Frank Schaeffer, and the commune, L'Abri, was run by his father, Francis Schaeffer, a Christian philosopher and art historian.
He was a completely off-the-wall, wonderful individual, thinning long hair, was wearing a pair of mountain climbing knickers of the kind that you associate with Swiss mountaineering back in the day.
He had a goatee, but no moustache, almost like a sort of 60s folk singer type look.
Well, it's kind of seems like an odd juxtaposition, but on Sunday morning he'd be preaching from what he called the inerrant word of God. But on Saturday night, the night before, he might be giving a lecture on Bob Dylan's lyrics.
L'Abri, which is the French word for shelter, was a stopover for travellers on their way to ashrams or kibbutzim. This was the early 70s, and Francis, unique among evangelical leaders, would lecture on how Christians should engage with modern art or the Woodstock Festival. He attracted some eclectic fans. Eric Clapton visited, and so did Billy Zioli, the man behind a powerhouse Christian film company, Gospel Films.
People were saying to my father, you ought to really do something that takes the lectures you give on the interrelationship of art, culture, and Christianity on film. You should make a documentary. Billy Zioli put together the financing of about a $3.5 million project, which in those days, that was a lot of money for a documentary.
And you got to direct it, even though you were, 19 years old?
Dad was one of these parents who believes in his children's talents.
Frank had grown up in the Alps, idolising directors like Fellini. And while he wasn't especially interested in directing his father's niche Christian art history documentary, he thought maybe he could get a showreel out of it to show Hollywood producers.
At the time, I was looking at this as film school, eventually thinking of going and making what I would have called real movies rather than something for the evangelical market.
Frank embraced the chance to experiment with directorial styles, and the resulting 1976 documentary series, How Should We Then Live, is very ambitious. There are actors in costume and a big travel budget. One minute, Francis is in a Florentine museum.
Anyone who could walk through the museums and not be overwhelmed with the beauty of the work of its art really is a very poor man indeed.
The next, he's on a Paris street, criticising the existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre for his moral relativism.
With Sartre's position, one can equally help an old woman across the street.
Merci, monsieur.
Or run her down.
Well, Dad would use examples like that to try to illustrate the fact that without the Word of God, look how bad these guys are. Look what this opens the door to.
But this story about a Christian art historian and his ambitious son is about to take a very strange turn. And all because of an unexpected creative decision Frank made midway through production.
Consider the human fetus, the unborn baby. In January 1973, the United States Supreme Court passed the abortion law.
Francis is talking about Roe v. Wade, which protected a woman's right to an abortion in every US state.
By this Supreme Court ruling, the unborn child is considered not to be a person.
The scene is odd, and not only because it was such a drastic gear shift from the rest of the series. It's mostly odd because Christian evangelicals in the 1970s weren't at all engaged with the issue of abortion. This was coming totally from left field.
Most evangelical Christians saw this as a quote-unquote Catholic issue. And in those days, we had nothing to do with Roman Catholics if we could help it. In fact, Dad's theology would say a Roman Catholic is going to hell.
But now here was the revered Francis Schaeffer, in the spirit of fostering his son's creativity, taking up the abortion issue.
It was my suggestion to my dad that we make the last 2 episodes about abortion and Roe v. Wade and the legalization of abortion. My suggestion came in the context of me being a teenage father myself. It's very personal. It has nothing to do with a philosophical argument. It's like, this was an unwanted pregnancy. Jeannie and I are teenagers. We're having this baby, and we love her.
With the 10-part series finished, Frank and his father set about promoting it, with their focus set on conquering the American evangelical market.
We launched the whole thing with a big seminar tour in 16 cities. We had big screens and would show it to audiences of about 15 to 20,000 people in places like Madison Square Gardens.
It was an instant hit with evangelicals. They were packing out stadiums.
So the kind of early childhood in this little humble hippie mission was done, and now my father was a big-time American evangelical leader, albeit still with his goatee and his knickers and all the rest of it.
I'd like for us all to stand and sing happy birthday to Dr. Schaeffer, with 4,000 people participating here and a few million out there watching by television from the Swiss Alps. Dr. Schaeffer.
We had mass audio cassette copying machines set up, turning out hundreds and hundreds of cassettes. By the end of that series, we knew everybody.
Francis Schaeffer had become a sensation in evangelical circles, and the secular world had no idea and probably wouldn't have been interested anyway.
In the US, the sort of coastal elite media weren't paying any attention to evangelicals or what they did or what they voted. In fact, my dad's books were outselling secular titles by as much as 5 to 1 and never showed up on a New York Times bestseller list because they were selling from church bookstores, which they weren't counting.
But something was bothering Frank. The show had been a hit despite his scenes about abortion. That was the one part the audience didn't seem keen on. Frank saw it as a challenge. He would take what the evangelicals didn't want to think about and force them to. He'd proposed to his father that they make a new series entirely about abortion.
I marched upstairs and said to him, we have to do this second series. And I started actually ranting at him, saying, if you don't do this series, that makes you like an abortionist. You have to speak out. So I was using every trick in the book that I knew. Of course, from his point of view, it's like, okay, it's another paycheck from my errant son. We'll do another one for him. So essentially, it's like me saying to him, give me a piece of the family business.
In the second series, in terms of directorial flourishes, Frank really went for it. There were ghostly children with their faces painted white, wandering the earth like melancholy French mimes. There's an anti-abortion doctor standing on a rock in the Dead Sea in Israel, surrounded by 1,000 dolls, 1,000 naked toy babies spread across the landscape as far as the eye can see, baking under the sun.
Salt. This is the site on which the city of Sodom once stood. Sodom comes readily to mind when one contemplates the evils of abortion. You are looking at 1,000 dolls. Multiply that by 6,000 and add 1 million a year, and you see the slaughter of the innocents.
I mean, in terms of getting to the point, it's a long way from patterns across Florentine architecture over erudite voiceover scolding humanistic man for his moral relativism. It's much more kind of visceral.
We were going for plastic dolls on the Dead Sea, all kinds of analogies, kids in cages. It's a piece of propaganda. We thought, okay, Dad's last book sold 1 million copies, and everybody and everybody's cousin has seen How Should We Then Live. We never did anything except fill stadiums. We'll do the same thing again. And crickets, as we say in the States, silence. We showed up with something no one wanted to hear about in the evangelical community.
So now you're doing your second tour and you're in half-filled stadiums.
Half-filled would have been nice. We're in empty stadiums with half the front row filled.
Oh, my God. I mean, there's nothing more dispiriting than booking a stadium and no one comes.
Exactly.
Would you discuss your feelings of disappointment, or did you keep it to yourselves?
Forget disappointment. It was absolutely poleaxed, thunderstruck. There's no tomorrow after this. We have killed ourselves. Dad and I sort of launched a crusade, as it were, without calling it that, to convince the evangelical leadership that they damn well better get on board, not just to save our butts by having full venues in the second half of the tour, which was a few months away, but also out of ego and also out of belief.
And so the Schaeffers travelled America trying to get abortion on the agenda of evangelical leaders like Wally Criswell of the vast Southern Baptist Convention, the second largest Christian denomination in the United States after the Catholic Church.
These guys were pro-choice. Dr. Criswell said, I'm not having anything to do with this. Why would I tell some girl that gets pregnant she's got to have the baby? I'm not preaching this. The editorial board of Christianity Today magazine, we went to them saying, hey, you put us on the cover when we came out with our last series. Why aren't you helping us promote this? Because we think you're wrong. We are not pro-life. We think this is an ambivalent issue at best. This isn't our bailiwick. We're not going there.
But then, a godsend. The New York Post ran a story about the Schaeffers' strange avant-garde anti-abortion film. Other city papers followed, and finally, feminist groups began to pay attention.
National Organization of Women, Planned Parenthood, etc. would picket each of our venues, and every time they did, it would make the local news.
One of the unifying issues of the movement...
And every time it made the local news, the next night a ton of evangelicals would show up to support us against these raging feminists who they already regarded as the enemy, not because of abortion, but because of everything from bra burning to saying that women should have careers and the whole rest. Out on the sidewalk, we had women screaming at us every time we came in, and the Christians loved this stuff because these weren't dangerous people. They were just angry women who were yelling. So it was quite a little scene out there on the sidewalk in Madison Square and other places. They were doing us a huge favor, the more the merrier. Plus, all the local news showed up. They never showed up for our seminar. Christians doing something weird in a stadium is not news in America. But at that stage, we got on the news because of these picketers.
When you think about the protesters, did you get the sense that they were condescending towards you?
Absolutely. These are a bunch of East Coast snobs. These are insular people. Now it was us versus them.
And so it was that there, outside the Schaeffer film screenings, with each side fired up by the news coverage and askance that the other side had the audacity to muscle in on their issue, that's the exact moment a culture war began.
There had been Roman Catholics out there with rosary beads picketing from the beginning. There weren't evangelicals.
But Frank says his films changed everything.
After we were done, The pickets and the protests grew enormous, and it became a regular thing. So women started to have to walk down a gauntlet of screaming, angry people, waving pictures of dead babies at them if they went to have an ultrasound or an abortion or any other service at Planned Parenthood. As the movement began to unfold, abortion clinics were bombed. Some people were shot.
Was anyone killed?
Oh, yes. Yeah, one of the people who shot one of the abortion providers had been someone who in the past had written a letter to my dad saying that he appreciated his work.
What was his name?
I'm trying to remember. Maybe it was Kopp. I'd have to look it up for you. Kopp. I forget.
It didn't take us long to find the shooting of the abortion provider that Frank was referring to, and also to find the shooting victim's niece.
The man who killed my uncle is Jim Kopp.
This is Amanda Robb. Her uncle was Bart Slepian.
He actually really never wanted to be a doctor. Blood freaked him out. Sick people freaked him out. He chose gynecology and obstetrics because it was a happy specialty. You delivered babies and most of your patients were healthy, and he thought that would be a good fit for him.
So carrying out abortions was never a calling for Bart. It was just part of the job.
He was very clear-eyed about abortion. He was like, I don't know when life begins. I know we're not taking care of the children we do have. When this thing became dangerous and they started shooting doctors, like the normal ones, they just stopped doing it. Like they were like, I didn't sign up for this. And my uncle was like, no way are a bunch of idiots gonna bully me out of doing my job. This is ridiculous. He'd be like in the milk aisle or something at the grocery store, and somebody would come up to him like and whisper, murderer, and then they would disappear. They followed his kids to school and would be like, why does your daddy kill babies? Can you tell your daddy not to kill babies?
And then, on October the 23rd, 1998, Amanda got the call. Her uncle had been killed in his home.
I went crazy. Everybody has their own way of reacting to tragedy, and my reaction was I was going to figure out why my uncle had died.
And so Amanda became a journalist. She spent years now interviewing anti-abortion murderers, including her uncles, and she's noticed some common ground. For all of them, she says, it began with the Schaeffer's documentaries.
These people saw the movie. The movie was shown in churches, and they would go to clinics and they would crawl across the parking lot like babies, so you couldn't get into the entrance. They would eventually get arrested, but they would post like a $50 fine, and they would be home by dinner. And so it became sort of a pastime for church ladies.
And into that world came Jim Kopp.
Jim Kopp was supposed to be the kid in the family who was going to be a doctor. In my opinion, and I'm not a clinician, he was schizophrenic by the time he was 17. In 1983, he graduated with a master's degree in biology, and he knew he couldn't cut it. And so he became very religious, and he traveled to L'Abri.
To be clear, the man who would murder Bart Slepian, Amanda's uncle, didn't only write Francis Schaeffer a fan letter. He took a pilgrimage to L'Abri, his Swiss mountain home. Did he listen to Francis Schaeffer speak?
Well, yeah, and what Francis Schaeffer did was, I think, give him a purpose. He got radicalized.
In the beginning, Francis had only put the abortion scenes into his documentary to nurture his son's creative ideas and his new interest in the pro-life movement after the birth of his daughter. But by 1981, Francis had become vehemently anti-abortion too. He published a book, A Christian Manifesto, that came very close to advocating violence against doctors.
Something Francis Schaeffer liked to say, and Jim would like to say later, is if you're a Christian, act like it. If you really think killing fetuses is the equivalent of killing 5-year-olds, well, then you have a moral obligation not to stand by and let the children be murdered.
And so, in October 1998, Jim Kopp travelled to Buffalo, New York.
Bart lived in a big house with a yard, and then behind the yard were woods. So on October 23rd, my uncle and aunt went to synagogue services, and they came home. And so he came in, he put down his keys, he started warming up some soup in the microwave. He was asking the kids about a Buffalo Sabres hockey game. And there was this ping and like a sound of a little shattered glass. And my uncle said, "I think I've been shot." And my aunt said, "Don't be ridiculous." And there was a bullet flying around the house. Like it'd gone through Bart and it hit the cabinets in the kitchen, and then it whizzed past one of my cousin's heads, splattering blood all over the place. And then it hit the mantle of the fireplace. Before the dinger went off on the microwave, Bart was dead. My cousin tried to get paper towels to staunch his father's bleeding. My aunt did CPR. Another cousin called 911. The other ones, I guess, just watched. They were between the ages of 7 and 15. And he died.
As the consequences of Frank's documentary intensified, where was he? By the time of Bart Slepian's murder, Frank was long gone from the movement. He says his disillusion began when his father became friends with the televangelist Jerry Falwell, the head of the vast anti-gay Christian right pressure group, the Moral Majority.
I was in Jerry Falwell's office one time when he said to me, "Well, you know what those homosexuals are doing? You know, if I had a dog that do that, I'd just take it out back and shoot it. These guys are not pleasant people." So people say, "Well, why'd you get out?" Like it was some theological moment of revelation. It wasn't. It was a moment of saying, this is so ugly. I cannot be this guy.
We'll meet Jerry Falwell again in a later episode. But Frank says there was another reason why he had to get out. He just didn't like how the evangelical world looked.
It was so uncool, so unaesthetic, so ugly. It's not who I wanted to be. I had a lady run up to me one time in an airport saying, "I've always wanted to meet your father." I mean, no introduction, nothing. Just run up to me. "Oh, Francis Schaeffer, it's going to be enough for me to touch a Schaeffer." And she reached out and grabbed my arm and then burst into tears.
Wow, what did you do?
Went home and screamed at my wife and said, "I have to get out of this mess."
And so Frank finally did what he'd been planning all along. He went into an editing suite with the footage he'd shot. The 1,000 dolls scattered in the Dead Sea, the old Parisian lady being hit by a car, all of it. And he got to work.
I cut maybe a 15, 20-minute show reel out of them, and I cut the God stuff out and the pro-life stuff out and very cynically made a show reel just showing I could move the camera and work with an actor, and got myself an agent and was off and running. They'd always say, "Whoa, what was this about?" "Oh, a documentary on art. You know, what are all those dolls down on the Dead Sea?" "Oh, well, it's just a thing we did to illustrate something." You're basically just lying through my teeth.
Frank did okay in Hollywood. Between 1986 and 1992, he directed 4 movies of wildly differing genres, an occult horror film called Headhunter, a slapstick comedy called Baby on Board, and a couple of post-apocalyptic action films, including Wired to Kill, in which, quote, "One Christian young man decides not to turn the other cheek anymore. He modifies his wheelchair to help him protect his family and kill the thugs."
They found the ultimate truth.
If you want history, you gotta make your own.
Frankie Schaeffer's film, Wired to Kill.
But as the years went by, Frank felt increasingly remorseful about the ripples that had ensued because of his earlier abortion films.
And I've spent the last 30 years of my life trying to undo the damage.
Do you feel that you have made any headway there?
No, I don't think I've made any headway in changing the minds of evangelicals, but what I have done is heartened, I think, many people who have felt the same about the evangelical movement as me and left.
He's done this by publishing a memoir, Crazy for God, and also by yelling at the Christian right on Twitter, just like how he says Planned Parenthood used to yell at him outside stadiums. But there's no doubt that Frank's remorse is sincere. Later, he emailed us, "My father and I had blood on our hands for the killing of Dr. Barnett Slepian and many other abortion providers. There is a direct line from what we Schaeffers did to Jim Copp murdering a doctor after reading my father's anti-abortion books and watching the movies I produced. I have no words to express my sorrow and the depth of my repentance for my stupidity and callous disregard for basic decency and the value of human life. I beg for forgiveness. I am ardently pro-choice and work to defend women's rights that I and my father did so much harm to in the 1970s and 80s. But Frank's contrition does not change the minds of men like the Reverend Rusty Thomas.
I've been serving the Lord full-time since about 1982.
Rusty leads Operation Save America, the biggest anti-abortion group in the United States today.
We go to the exposed areas where child sacrifice, the shedding of innocent blood is being committed by abortion.
How influential was Francis Schaeffer in inspiring you to do this?
I think most people consider him sort of the grandfather. He was the one, I guess, initially that kind of put his mouth to the trumpet and sounded the alarm.
You know, I think a lot of people listening to this will think, well, abortion is a woman's issue.
I tend to differ in my view, John. I truly believe that abortion is not a woman's issue. I believe it's more of a man's issue. And what I mean by that is that God has called men to protect, provide, and care for women and children.
I think for decades, Rusty would have sounded to most people like an anachronism, shut out of mainstream politics. But all that changed with Donald Trump's 2016 election campaign.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
And while in power, Donald Trump did install hundreds of conservative judges, including 3 to the Supreme Court. It's no surprise then that some pro-life activists joined the Stop the Steal conspiracy theorists who flooded Washington, D.C. on January the 6th, 2021.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down to the Capitol. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
Do you know anyone who was there in D.C. that day?
Oh, absolutely. Some of our leaders were there. Some of our leaders knew that this was going to be, a tremendous gathering and a great opportunity. And so they set up a powerful sound system near the monument.
Take that house! Take it down!
If Frank Schaeffer had never existed, I guess Jerry Falwell's Moral Majority or another group would at some point have identified abortion as a culture war wedge issue and gone for it. But Frank Schaeffer did exist, and so this is the strange way history unfolded. An ambitious kid wanted to make it in Hollywood, which led to abortion being taken up en masse by evangelicals, which led to doctors like Bart Slepian being murdered by extremists. Of course, other factors will have influenced Jim Copp between watching Frank's films and murdering Bart Slepian years later. But one of Copp's family members told Bart's niece Amanda that the Schaeffers were the spark that ignited his hatred of abortion, and the ripples continued to spread. In September 2021, the US Supreme Court allowed Texas to end legal abortion after 6 weeks in an attempt to cut off access to almost all abortions for millions of people. As Amanda says,
there's like a very wide swath in this country where it's almost impossible to get an abortion now. To go to a clinic, you have to drive. They're usually far away. It costs a lot of money. And you're seeing women self-abort a lot more.
So it's the Schaeffers. This is Schaeffer ripples.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's Schaeffer ripples. That weird guy and his weird obsession, yeah, absolutely impacted my world.
Maybe the story was a cautionary tale, that sometimes in culture wars our ideological leaders are not who they seem, and we're instead being manipulated by people with the strangest private agendas. Next time, how a misunderstanding over a Liverpool poem contributed to the bombing of a school in West Virginia in 1974. Things Fell Apart was written and presented by me, Jon Ronson, and produced by Sarah Shebbier. The music was composed by Phil Channel. The programme was mixed by Bob Nettles. The editor was Philip Sellers. It's a BBC audio production for BBC Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.